I stared at the forged document in disbelief, the signature clearly not matching the one I had on file. The funny thing about being a fraud investigator is that sometimes you find fraud when you're not even looking for it. My name is Jack Lawson, and little did I know that buying a house in Willow Creek Estates would lead me to uncover one of the most elaborate HOA scams I'd ever seen. It all started on a perfectly pleasant May morning. I'd moved into my new home in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, just 3 months earlier. As a forensic accountant specializing in fraud investigation for Deloitte, I'd spent 15 years following paper trails and catching white-collar criminals. I never expected to use those skills in my own neighborhood. I was organizing my home office when the doorbell rang. Opening the door, I found a middle-aged woman with an artificially bright smile and hair styled in what I could only describe as an aggressively perfect bob. "Good morning. I'm Linda Peterson, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. Welcome to the neighborhood." She extended a manicured hand, which I shook politely. "Jack Lawson, nice to meet you. I just wanted to drop off your welcome packet and remind you about the community standards." She handed me a thick folder. "We pride ourselves on maintaining property values here in Willow Creek." I nodded, flipping through the documents. "Thanks, I'll look these over." "Oh, and the quarterly dues are due next week. It's $750, I nearly choked. $750. The disclosure document said HOA fees were $350 per quarter. Linda's smile never wavered. "There was a special assessment voted on last month for the new community center. It's all detailed in Section 4 of your packet." After she left, I reviewed the documents carefully. The special assessment seemed legitimate at first glance. There were meeting minutes, voting records, and financial projections. But something felt off. The signatures of the board members looked suspiciously similar. I didn't think much of it until I met my neighbor, Martin Chen, while mowing my lawn the following weekend. "How are you liking it here so far?" he asked, pausing by my driveway. "It's great, though I was surprised by the HOA fees. $750 seems steep." Martin's brow furrowed. "That can't be right." "We pay $350 quarterly." Linda mentioned a special assessment for the new community center. "What community center? That proposal was voted down 6 months ago." My investigator instincts immediately kicked in. "Do you have copies of the meeting minutes?" "Sure, I keep all that stuff." "I'll bring them over later." That evening, Martin came by with his HOA documents. We spread them across my dining table, comparing them with what Linda had given me. The differences were stark. According to Martin's records, the community center proposal had been rejected in November of the previous year, with no special assessment authorized. "These can't both be correct," I said, holding up Linda's version and Martin's side by side. "I was at that meeting," Martin insisted. The vote was 28-12 against the center. Linda was furious. I examined the signatures more closely. "Do you know these other board members? Aaron Davis and Jennifer Miller?" "Sure, Aaron lives 3 doors down. Jennifer moved to Seattle last year, though she was on the board before leaving." According to these minutes Linda gave me, Jennifer voted for the assessment 2 months ago. Martin shook his head. "That's impossible." I spent the next few days quietly asking questions around the neighborhood. I learned that Linda had been HOA president for 5 years, and while many found her demanding and strict about rules, no one had suspected anything illegal. The picture that emerged was of a woman obsessed with control who faced little opposition. Most homeowners just wanted to avoid conflict. A week later, I attended my first HOA meeting in the clubhouse near the community pool. About 30 residents showed up, sitting in neat rows of folding chairs. Linda presided from a table at the front, flanked by a thin, nervous-looking man she introduced as Aaron Davis, the treasurer, and a younger woman named Rebecca Thompson, the secretary. "Before we begin," Linda announced, "I want to remind everyone that the second installment of the special assessment is due next month. Our new community center construction begins in August." A middle-aged woman raised her hand. I thought we voted against the community center last year. No, Patricia, you're thinking of the initial proposal, Linda replied smoothly. We revised the plans and it passed in January. It's all in the minutes. No one challenged her further. I watched Aaron closely during this exchange. He kept his eyes down, fidgeting with his pen. Something wasn't right. After the meeting, I approached him in the parking lot. Aaron, I'm Jack Lawson, new to the neighborhood. Oh, hello. His handshake was limp, his smile forced. Quick question about the special assessment I'm trying to budget for the year. Do you have the financial projections? I'd like to see how the funds are being allocated. Aaron glanced over his shoulder. Linda was still inside, talking to some residents. I don't have those with me. Linda handles most of that. But you're the treasurer, right? He shifted uncomfortably. Yes, but... Look, I need to get home. Email the HOA account and someone will send you what you need. As he hurried to his car, I knew I'd hit a nerve. The next day, I emailed the HOA address requesting financial documents. I received a polite but dismissive response stating that detailed financials were only shared at quarterly meetings. I decided to take a different approach. Since Jennifer Miller had supposedly voted on a measure months after moving away, I needed to confirm her signature was forged. Through some professional contacts, I obtained a loan application she'd signed the previous year. The signature on Linda's meeting minutes didn't even come close to matching. I also discovered something else troubling. According to county records, no permits had been filed for a community center construction project at Willow Creek Estates. My suspicions growing, I expanded my investigation. I learned that the HOA account received approximately $140,000 annually from the regular dues of 100 homes paying $350 quarterly. The special assessment of $400 additional per quarter would bring in another $160,000 per year. That was a lot of money with seemingly little oversight. I called a former colleague at the Portland White Collar Crime Division, Detective Sarah Johnson. Sarah, it's Jack Lawson. I might have something interesting for you. Jack, haven't heard from you since the Henderson case. What's up? I think the president of my HOA is embezzling funds and forging documents. I've got evidence of falsified meeting minutes and signatures. Your radar always was good. What's your evidence so far? I detailed what I'd found. Sarah agreed it warranted looking into, but needed more concrete proof before the department could get involved. Get me bank statements if you can. We need to follow the money. Easier said than done. HOA financial records weren't public, and I had no legal authority to demand them. But I did have an advantage: years of experience getting people to reveal information they didn't intend to share. My opportunity came at the community pool the following Saturday. Rebecca Thompson, the HOA secretary, was there with her children. I struck up a casual conversation mentioning that I worked in finance. Really? What kind? She asked, watching her kids splash in the shallow end. Forensic accounting. I investigate financial irregularities for companies. Rebecca tensed slightly. That sounds interesting. It can be. I'm actually considering volunteering for the HOA board. I think my skills could be useful. We don't really need, she stopped herself. I mean, that's nice of you to offer. I noticed some discrepancies in the special assessment documentation, just small things, probably clerical errors. Rebecca's face paled. What kind of discrepancies? Signatures that don't seem to match, dates that conflict with other records. I'd be happy to help straighten it all out. She stood abruptly. I should check on my kids. Nice talking to you. The next morning, I found Rebecca on my doorstep, looking nervous. Can we talk? She asked, glancing over her shoulder. I invited her in and offered coffee, which she accepted with shaking hands. I think Linda's doing something illegal with the HOA funds, she blurted out as soon as we sat down. What makes you say that? I've only been secretary for 8 months. At first, everything seemed normal, but then Linda started asking me to sign off on minutes for meetings that went differently than I remembered. When I questioned her, she said I must have misunderstood or that my notes were incomplete. What about the community center vote? Rebecca stared into her coffee. It never passed. Linda created those minutes herself and forged the signatures. She told Aaron and me it was just a formality, that she was going to convince everyone it was the right decision, but needed to move quickly to secure the contractor. And the money. Do you know where it's going? Linda controls the bank accounts. Aaron just signs what she puts in front of him. I think he's afraid of her. Rebecca agreed to help me gather evidence. As HOA secretary, she had access to certain records Linda might not show me. She promised to make copies of what she could. 2 days later, Rebecca texted me. Emergency HOA meeting called for tomorrow. Linda knows someone's asking questions. The meeting was tense. Linda stood at the front of the room, her usually perfect appearance slightly frazzled. It has come to my attention that certain individuals are spreading misinformation about our HOA decisions and finances, she began, scanning the room. Her eyes lingered on me for a moment. I want to assure everyone that all board actions have been taken legitimately and in accordance with our bylaws. She then presented a slideshow about the community center project, showing architectural renderings and a construction timeline. According to her presentation, groundbreaking was just weeks away. Any questions? She asked, her tone suggesting there shouldn't be any. I raised my hand. I was wondering about the permitting process. I checked with the county and there don't appear to be any permits filed for this project. A murmur went through the room. Linda's smile tightened. We're still in the final approval stages with the county. These things take time, as I'm sure you understand, and the contractor, who's been selected for this project, Meridian Construction. They came highly recommended. I nodded, making a note. I already knew there was no Meridian Construction registered in Oregon. After the meeting, Linda cornered me in the parking lot. Mr. Lawson, you seem very interested in our HOA operations. Just trying to understand where my money's going. I don't appreciate the implication of your questions. This community ran perfectly smoothly before you arrived. I'm sure it did. I'm just a naturally curious person. Occupational hazard, I suppose. What exactly is your occupation? Her eyes narrowed. I'm a fraud investigator with Deloitte. Specialized in financial crimes. The color drained from Linda's face, but she recovered quickly. How interesting. Well, I can assure you, you won't find any fraud here, just dedicated volunteers trying to improve our community. The next day, Rebecca texted that Linda had called an emergency board meeting without her. When she confronted Linda, she was told her services as secretary were no longer required. She's cleaning house, I told Detective Johnson when I updated her. She fired Rebecca from the board. That's not helping her look innocent, Sarah replied. What about those bank records? Working on it. I think I have a way to get them. Aaron Davis was my target. As treasurer, he had access to the financial records, and based on my observations, he was the weak link. He was either complicit or being manipulated, but either way, I suspected he might crack under pressure. I caught him one evening as he walked his dog. Aaron, can we talk? Privately? He looked terrified but nodded. We walked to a small park at the edge of the neighborhood. I know about the forged documents, I said once we were alone, and I suspect there's financial fraud happening with the HOA funds. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered unconvincingly. Aaron, I'm a forensic accountant who specializes in fraud investigation. The police are already interested. Right now, they're trying to determine who's involved and who's just being used. He sat heavily on a bench. She said it was temporary, just borrowing the money to help her daughter start a business. She promised to pay it all back before anyone noticed. How much has she taken? Almost $200,000 over the past 2 years. The special assessment was supposed to cover the shortfall, but there was never going to be a community center. I need proof, Aaron. Bank statements, transfer records. He hesitated. She'll know it was me. She's going to be caught regardless. The question is whether you go down with her or help yourself by cooperating. The next day, Aaron delivered a USB drive containing 3 years of HOA financial records. The evidence was damning. Linda had been systematically transferring HOA funds to a personal account, disguising the transactions as payments to vendors for community maintenance. The special assessment was her attempt to replace the money before anyone discovered the theft. I took the evidence to Detective Johnson, who brought in the Financial Crimes Unit. They moved quickly, obtaining warrants for Linda's personal and business accounts. What they found was even worse than we suspected. Linda had been embezzling from 3 different HOAs she managed in the Portland area, taking advantage of lax oversight and homeowners' general disinterest in the minutiae of HOA operations. The total amount stolen exceeded $500,000. 2 weeks later, I watched from my front window as police officers led Linda Peterson from her home in handcuffs. Neighbors gathered on their lawns, expressions ranging from shock to vindication. The perfect suburban facade had cracked, revealing the rot beneath. The aftermath was chaotic. Emergency meetings were called, interim board members appointed, and forensic auditors brought in to untangle the financial mess. I was asked to help with the reconstruction of the HOA's finances, a task I accepted reluctantly. I hadn't moved to Willow Creek to become involved in community politics, but here I was. As we pieced together the extent of Linda's scheme, the story became more complex. She had started small, borrowing funds to help her daughter's failing boutique. When that business went under, she began using HOA money to maintain her lifestyle, which included expensive vacations and a gambling habit none of us had known about. The community center scheme had been her most ambitious attempt to cover her tracks, a fictional project to justify collecting extra money to fill the hole in the accounts. Aaron Davis resigned as treasurer, cooperating fully with investigators in exchange for immunity. Rebecca Thompson was reinstated as secretary and became a key figure in rebuilding trust within the community. 3 months after Linda's arrest, I sat in a crowded courtroom for her arraignment. She pleaded not guilty to 27 counts of fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. "How does it feel to be on this side of a fraud case?" Detective Johnson asked me as we left the courthouse. "Strange," I admitted. "Usually I'm just preparing reports for prosecutors, not actively gathering evidence." "You did good work. Without you, she might have kept this going for years." The preliminary hearing was held a month later. I testified about the forged documents and financial irregularities I'd discovered. Linda sat at the defense table, glaring at me throughout my testimony. Her attorney tried to paint me as a busybody who had conducted an unauthorized investigation, but the evidence was overwhelming. The judge found probable cause to proceed to trial on all counts. Linda was offered a plea deal 15 years, eligible for parole after 5, but she refused, maintaining her innocence despite the mountain of evidence. The trial was scheduled for January, 8 months away. In the meantime, our community had to heal and rebuild. We elected a new HOA board with strict oversight provisions. Quarterly financial reviews became mandatory, conducted by an independent accountant. Meeting minutes had to be verified by multiple board members and made available to all residents within 48 hours. The story made headlines in Oregon. HOA president charged in major embezzlement scheme and fraud investigator uncovers neighborhood scam. I declined interview requests, preferring to stay out of the spotlight, but word got around. My professional reputation soared, leading to new consulting opportunities. Ironically, I became something of an expert on HOA fraud prevention. As the trial approached, Linda's attorney made increasingly desperate motions to suppress evidence or dismiss charges. Each was denied. The prosecution's case was solid, built on a foundation of financial records, forged documents, and witness testimony. On a cold January morning, the trial began. The courtroom was packed with Willow Creek residents and members of the other HOAs Linda had defrauded. The prosecution's opening statement was devastating, laying out a pattern of deception spanning years. I testified on the second day. explaining how I'd first noticed discrepancies in the meeting minutes and followed the trail to the financial fraud. "Mr. Lawson," the prosecutor asked, "based on your professional experience, would you characterize these financial discrepancies as potential errors or deliberate fraud?" "These were clearly deliberate," I replied. "The systematic nature of the transactions, the efforts to conceal them through false documentation, and the creation of fictional projects to justify additional funding all point to intentional fraud." Linda's attorney attempted to undermine my credibility during cross-examination. "Mr. Lawson, isn't it true that you conducted this so-called investigation without any official capacity or authority?" I reviewed documents that were provided to me as a homeowner and spoke with my neighbors. When I found evidence of potential crimes, I contacted law enforcement. "And didn't you specifically target my client from the beginning?" "I didn't target anyone. I questioned discrepancies in official documents that didn't match reality." The trial lasted 2 weeks. The prosecution called 27 witnesses, including homeowners from all 3 affected communities, former board members, and financial experts who confirmed my findings. The defense tried to portray Linda as a dedicated community volunteer who had made some accounting errors but never intended to steal. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning with their verdict, guilty on all counts. At the sentencing hearing a month later, the judge was severe. "Mrs. Peterson, you abused a position of trust to systematically steal from your neighbors. You created elaborate fictions to cover your crimes and attempted to intimidate those who questioned you. This court sentences you to 18 years in state prison." Linda was led away, still protesting her innocence. As I watched her go, I felt no satisfaction, only relief that the ordeal was over. In the months that followed, our community slowly recovered. The new HOA board, led by Martin Chen, implemented strict financial controls. The special assessment funds were returned to homeowners, and dues were actually reduced once we eliminated unnecessary expenses Linda had built into the budget to facilitate her theft. 1 year after Linda's arrest, we held a community picnic at the park where the fictional community center would have been built. There was a sense of renewal in the air. Neighbors who had previously only nodded politely now engaged in genuine conversation. The shared experience of betrayal and recovery had, paradoxically, brought us closer together. Rebecca Thompson found me by the grills where I was helping cook hamburgers. "Hard to believe it's been a year," she said. "Sometimes it feels like it just happened, sometimes like it was a different lifetime." The new system is working well. 3 different people have to approve any expenditure over $500 now. I nodded. "Trust but verify, it's a good policy. We couldn't have done it without you, you know." Most people would have just paid the increased dues and complained privately. "Professional deformation," I said with a smile. "I see fraud everywhere I look. Lucky for us." As the sun set over Willow Creek Estates that evening, I reflected on the strange journey that had begun with a simple discrepancy in an HOA document. In my career, I'd investigated massive corporate frauds involving millions of dollars, but none had felt as personal as this case. This wasn't just about money, it was about a breach of community trust. Linda Peterson would serve at least 9 years before being eligible for parole. Her daughter, who claimed no knowledge of where the money for her failed business had come from, had moved away, selling her mother's house to help pay restitution to the HOAs. Aaron Davis had avoided charges through his cooperation, but had also left the neighborhood, unable to face his former neighbors. 6 months after the sentencing, I received an unexpected visit from Detective Johnson. "We need your expertise again," she said, sitting in my living room. "We're seeing similar patterns in HOAs across the state. Your case with Linda Peterson has opened a floodgate of complaints and investigations. You think this is widespread?" More than anyone realized. HOAs handle billions of dollars nationally with minimal oversight. It's a perfect environment for fraud. I agreed to consult on some of these cases, examining financial records and governance documents for signs of embezzlement or mismanagement. The patterns were often similar: board members with too much control, homeowners with too little information, and money disappearing into fabricated projects or phantom maintenance. One case in Salem involved an HOA president who had created a fake landscaping company that billed for services never performed. In Eugene, a treasurer had been writing checks to himself for 7 years, disguising them as vendor payments. The amounts varied, but the methods were consistent: exploit apathy, control information, and create plausible cover stories. My experience at Willow Creek made me something of an authority on the subject. I was invited to speak at conferences for community managers and HOA board members, sharing lessons learned and preventative measures. I even wrote a guide called Protecting Your Community: Financial Safeguards for HOAs that became popular among newly elected board members across the country. 2 years after Linda's conviction, I testified before a state legislative committee considering new regulations for homeowners associations. The current system lacks fundamental protections, I explained to the lawmakers. HOAs collect and spend billions of dollars annually with minimal requirements for financial transparency or governance controls. This creates opportunities for unscrupulous individuals to exploit their positions. The resulting legislation, passed 6 months later, established new requirements for HOA financial reporting, mandated regular independent audits for larger associations, and created an ombudsman's office to handle homeowner complaints and investigate allegations of mismanagement. Meanwhile, life in Willow Creek Estates continued to improve. Our quarterly dues, now transparently managed and properly allocated, proved sufficient to maintain the community without the fictional special assessments Linda had imposed. The swimming pool was renovated, the landscaping improved, and community events became more frequent and better attended. On the 3rd anniversary of Linda's arrest, I received a letter from her. The prison return address made me pause before opening it. "Mr. Lawson," she wrote, "I've had 3 years to think about what happened. While my attorneys still believe there are grounds for appeal, I've come to accept responsibility for my actions. The money problem started small, just borrowing to help my daughter, but grew beyond my control. I convinced myself I would pay it all back before anyone noticed. I was wrong, and I'm paying the price. I want you to know I harbor no ill will toward you for doing what you believed was right." The letter continued with apologies to the community and expressions of remorse that seemed genuine. I wasn't sure what to make of it. People facing long prison sentences often find religion or remorse, but that doesn't necessarily mean they've truly changed. I shared the letter with Martin Chen, now in his 2nd term as HOA president. "You believe her?" he asked after reading it. "I don't know. The human capacity for self-deception is remarkable. She might genuinely believe now that she only had good intentions that went awry." "Does it matter?" I considered the question. "Maybe not to us, but it might to her. Everyone needs a story they can live with." Around this time, I began dating Julia Evans, a professor at Portland State University who had moved into the neighborhood the previous year. She found my involvement in the HOA fraud case fascinating. "It's like a small-town crime thriller," she said over dinner at my place. The trusted community leader with a secret, the newcomer who uncovers the truth, the web of lies unraveling. "It wasn't that dramatic living through it," I said, though in retrospect, perhaps it was. "Have you thought about writing a book about it? Not just the Willow Creek case, but the whole phenomenon of HOA fraud." I hadn't, but the idea took root. Over the next year, in between my regular work and consulting on other HOA fraud cases, I researched and wrote The Perfect Cover: How Homeowners Associations Become Vehicles for Fraud. The book detailed Linda's case and others I'd consulted on, offered prevention strategies for communities, and examined the psychological and social factors that allowed such frauds to flourish. The book was published 4 years after Linda's conviction and received more attention than I'd expected. I appeared on local news programs and was invited to speak at community management conferences across the country. The experience was surreal. I'd never sought the spotlight, but found myself becoming an advocate for HOA reform and financial transparency. 5 years into Linda's sentence, she became eligible for her first parole hearing. The board invited me to provide a statement, which I did in writing, neither opposing nor supporting her release. I simply detailed the facts of the case and the impact on the community. Her parole was denied, largely due to the scale of her crimes and the position of trust she had abused. She would be eligible to apply again in 2 years. Life moved on. Julia and I married in a small ceremony in our backyard, attended by neighbors who had become true friends through the shared experience of rebuilding our community. Martin stepped down as HOA president, passing the role to a retired accountant who maintained the transparent practices we'd established. I continued my work at Deloitte while consulting on HOA fraud cases around the country. The patterns were remarkably consistent: trusted leaders, minimal oversight, and complex schemes that exploited community apathy and trust. 6 years after Linda's conviction, I received a call from the prosecutor who had handled her case. "She's making another appeal," he told me. "Claims there's new evidence that Aaron Davis was the real mastermind and framed her." "That's absurd," I replied. "The evidence was overwhelming. I agree, but we'll need you to review the case files again and possibly testify at the hearing." The appeal was scheduled for 3 months later. I spent weekends reviewing my notes and the evidence, refreshing my memory of details that had begun to fade. The case against Linda had been solid: bank records showing transfers to her personal accounts, forged documents in her handwriting, witness testimony about her controlling behavior, and explicit threats to those who questioned her. On the day of the hearing, I arrived at the courthouse to find several of my neighbors already there, including Rebecca Thompson and Martin Chen. Linda's attempt to shift blame to Aaron Davis had angered many who had lived through her deceptions. Inside the courtroom, Linda looked older and harder than I remembered. Prison had not been kind to her. Her attorney argued that new evidence suggested Aaron Davis had orchestrated the embezzlement and manipulated Linda into taking actions that would implicate her while protecting himself. When I took the stand, the attorney tried to undermine my investigation. "Mr. Lawson, isn't it true that you specifically targeted Mrs. Peterson from the beginning of your so-called investigation?" "No, I noticed discrepancies in documents and followed the evidence." "And this evidence led you directly to my client, not to Mr. Davis, who conveniently received immunity for his testimony." "The evidence led where it led. Mr. Davis cooperated because he recognized his minor role in a scheme orchestrated by Mrs. Peterson." The judge was unimpressed by the defense's arguments. The new evidence turned out to be little more than reinterpretations of facts already presented at trial. The appeal was denied, and Linda was returned to prison to serve at least 2 more years before her next parole hearing. As we left the courthouse, Rebecca shook her head. 7 years later, and she's still trying to blame everyone else. "Some people never accept responsibility," I said. "It's easier to believe you're the victim of a conspiracy than to admit you betrayed people who trusted you." In the years that followed, Willow Creek Estates became known as a model HOA, with transparent operations, active community involvement, and financial practices that protected against fraud. Other associations sent representatives to learn from our example, and I occasionally conducted workshops on fraud prevention for newly elected HOA boards. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd moved to Willow Creek seeking a quiet suburban life, and instead found myself at the center of a fraud investigation that transformed both the community and my professional focus. My book had led to speaking engagements and consulting opportunities I'd never anticipated. When Linda Peterson finally gained parole after serving 9 years of her 18-year sentence, the news barely caused a ripple in our community. We had moved on, building something stronger from the ruins of her deception. On the 10th anniversary of her arrest, our HOA held a community celebration not to commemorate bringing a criminal to justice, but to recognize how far we'd come as a neighborhood. The park was filled with families enjoying barbecue and games, neighbors who knew each other by name, and a sense of genuine community that had grown from shared adversity. Julia nudged me as we watched children playing on the new playground equipment the HOA had legitimately funded. Look at what came from all that chaos. Would any of this have happened without Linda's crimes? It was an interesting question. The fraud had forced us to rebuild our community governance from the ground up, creating systems of transparency and involvement that might never have developed otherwise. Out of betrayal had come trust, out of deception had come authenticity. I'd like to think we would have gotten here eventually, I said, but maybe not as quickly or completely. As the sun set on our gathering, I reflected on the strange journey that had begun with a simple question about HOA fees. I'd never intended to become an investigator in my own community, an expert on association fraud, or an advocate for reform. Life takes unexpected turns, and sometimes the most meaningful paths are those we never planned to walk. Linda Peterson had wanted to build a fictional community center to cover her crimes. Instead, her downfall had built something more valuable, a genuine community founded on transparency, accountability, and trust. As I looked around at my neighbors, now friends, I couldn't help but appreciate the irony. In trying to steal from us, she had inadvertently given us something priceless. The case had changed me too. Beyond the professional recognition and new career opportunities, it had reconnected me with the fundamental purpose of my work as a fraud investigator, not just following paper trails and calculating damages, but protecting communities and ensuring that trust, once given, is honored rather than exploited. As darkness fell and neighbors began heading home, Julia slipped her arm through mine. Ready to go, I nodded, taking one last look at the community that had been transformed through crisis and recovery. Yes, I said, let's go home.